Welcome back, viewers. In this video, we're talking more about data you could be missing during processing or review. I actually wasn't planning on making this video, but when I posted my previous video, I got an excellent comment by Rick Clark from ESI Analyst. And here's what he said. We're seeing more and more inclusion of user-generated activity like login, logout, saving or copying files to external drives, and geolocation to help show not only communications but activities, whereabouts of a custodian. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's a great point. I don't really work with user-generated activity. In fact, I rarely see that. So I reached out to ESI Analyst, which wasn't too difficult because we're already working on some projects together, and I said, would you like to do a video with me and talk more about it and kind of educate me what this user activity is, how it works, and so on? To which they said, sure. And today I'm joined on the call by Charlie Platt, who we are going to ask all about generated user activity. Let me grab my headset and we are going to start. Charlie, welcome and thank you for agreeing to be on the call with me and allowing me to ask you some questions about user generated activity.
It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Nikolai.
So you work with Rick at ESI Analyst, and you guys deal with user activity data a lot, as I can tell.
Yes, part of the big thing of what we're gearing to do is show this is the activity. These are the types of things that people do. This is sort of their pattern of life, if you will.
Got it. And just to recap, so what are some of the actual activities that gets captured in this, what we call user-generated activity?
Yeah, so I think there's really two categories I think of when I think of user-generated activity data. The first is purposely gathered information about activity. We think of this as like GPS data. Mm-hmm. So if my phone's constantly tracking my location, saving that information, if I'm using Android, it's actually storing that data up in Google's cloud. If I'm using iPhone, it's storing it up in Apple's iCloud. And that information is tracking where I go and what I do. One of the interesting things about it is it can directly contradict what I say. So in some instances, I might text someone and say, hey, I'm on my way. I'll be there in 5 minutes. My GPS data might say I'm an hour away. There's no way I'm going to be there in 5 minutes. So my written communications can be contradictory to what the device is recorded and saying I'm doing. The second category of user-generated data that I think of is sort of non-purposeful. It's user-generated data or activity data that is created and recorded by your devices whose purpose isn't to track you, but ultimately ends up doing so. So for instance, in Microsoft Windows, whenever you access a document like a spreadsheet or a Microsoft Word document, an artifact is created called a jump link. This jump link records that you opened this file on this date and time, you saved it on this date and time, and it's used by Microsoft in Windows to do things like when I go to Outlook and I write an email, then I get the drop down of my most recent documents to attach. So Microsoft did it in order to facilitate the user interface and experience. We can use it to say, you opened this document on this date and time.
Got it. And so when all this data gets generated and saved, how does it usually get acquired? Because in a traditional way of acquiring data, we go to somebody's server, we either extract data from Exchange or we copy native files from a file store. But where is this user data actually stored? Like, how does it get acquired in the forensic process?
Sure. So a lot of times it gets acquired when we do a collection of an individual's computer. So if we go as a forensics analyst to collect a computer, I'm going to take a bit-by-bit image of the hard drive. This bit-by-bit image of the hard drive is going to contain all of these artifacts. I may then just pull out Microsoft Office documents, user documents, and that type of stuff to produce for review. But if we need to, we can always go back and say, hey, I found a really interesting document. Can you tell me the history of this? Can you tell me when the user first created it, when they opened it? Are these dates that I'm seeing here valid? And then we can do forensics against the entire computer and say, hey, you know what? I also found that it went to a thumb drive, or I found that it was stored on this network server as well. They can give us pointers to other locations.
Got it. So it's the forensic software, the process of acquiring a device that gets all this information. And this applies to pretty much all of the devices like PCs, well, you said Android devices. I know iPhones tend to be very restrictive, like as far as how much information they capture and store. Apple tries to be very privacy oriented. So would you find as much of that information on iPhones as well?
So Windows devices and Android devices tend to have a lot of data that we can get. As we move towards sort of the Mac operating system and iPhones, there's less, but there's still good data there. Apple tends to be very restrictive in that they encrypt everything and they don't want to let you get into it, and they keep it very locked down. That doesn't mean the data is not there. And then sort of if you go even for like Linux can be very difficult to get this type of information from, especially if it's in an admin type of situation where people are using command line and things like that.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. So I guess we can think of this information as an additional metadata on top of regular metadata we have. Is that a kind of good way of describing it? You have your, let's say, native file, then you have your typical metadata, and then the user activity would be supplemental metadata on top of that metadata, right?
It is, yeah. That's a really good way to put it. I hadn't ever heard it put that way before. But it is. It's additional data about your data. It's additional information about activity that was created or used to create your data. In along those lines, Google Docs, which is a new area for us, somewhat in forensics, stores a ton of information. In fact, you can actually get individual keystrokes by users out of a Google Doc and find when areas were edited, things were deleted, things were added back in. So you get all this kind of crazy information about how a document was actually written.
Got it. And just thinking of this all additional metadata, all this activity. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm just kind of thinking, can you use that information by itself to prove anything, or does it always have to go with the actual native files, emails, and so on? Because let's say you have user activity for certain files, but you don't have those files. Would that user activity still be somewhat valid, or like, what is your take on that?
So it's definitely valid, and it can be very valuable. And it can do a couple of things. It can point you to new areas of discovery. So you could have a laptop and you review the laptop and there's no documents on there that match what you want, but there is user activity data that says documents with interesting file names were saved to a thumb drive. So now as an attorney, you might say, hey, I want to see what's on that thumb drive. You've preserved the computer, but now I have evidence that a thumb drive was in play. Tell me about that. Where is it? Let me know what documents are on it.
Yeah, and then you can start inquiring about, okay, let's get that piece of information. Does somebody have a thumb drive in their desk, which we didn't see before, or something like that, right?
Yep, absolutely. It also can show you times when people access documents or browse network shares. And this comes into play a lot in intellectual property and employee risk. When employees leave an organization, we can take a look at the last few weeks or month of their activity and say, hey, this guy did some weird stuff right before they left. They browsed sensitive documents on the network. They plugged USB drives in. They accessed Google Drive. All things that we don't see them doing prior to that in their experience or their career here at this organization. And we can then sort of show, hey, they may have taken some documents that they shouldn't have had access to or shouldn't have taken with them. And we can go to them and say, hey, remember you signed this. This is a confidentiality agreement. You shouldn't have those documents. Do you have them? If you do, return them.
Got it. It seems like this type of data is really useful in an investigation process. Now, when it comes time further in the process, when you go to, let's say, produce this data, would you include that data in the production, or would you produce it in any way, or would you just use that data to possibly testify based on, or use it like in an affidavit or something like that?
I think mostly it would come into play. You're going to want to interpret it, right? I think if you just produce it, it's going to be difficult for people to understand what it is you're showing them, what you're telling them. So in explaining it, you're going to probably do that through an expert report or an affidavit or something like that. And then subsequently, that's probably going to lead to deposition testimony, may end up ultimately leading to trial testimony. It's definitely going to be something that you're going to want to have an expert work with you on to help you explain, hey, I've got this data, this is what it means, this is why you can rely on it.
All right. The only minor problem with this type of data that I'm thinking of is it would be a little hard to represent that data in sort of a traditional review system where you have like fixed fields and try to take that data and put it there. But I know you guys at ESI Analyst have sort of solved that, and you have a completely different way of presenting that data, making it much more usable. So perhaps we can do a follow-up video in the future, and maybe you or Rick can do a quick demo of how that data actually looks inside your system and how it's being visualized. Because again, working with like all these delimited files like from to CC subject, it's really hard to imagine breaking out into this different types of data, such as GPS, file copy, and thumb drive insertions. Like, which field would that even go? This is what I'm thinking. Like, do I have to make like 50 different fields just to load that? And how would somebody even work with that? It would be really crazy to try to filter from multiple fields. So do you just dump everything as text? Then it's going to have a whole new set of problems. So that's what I'm thinking. Maybe we could do a follow-up video, and either you or Rick can show us what it actually looks like inside ESI Analyst, so we get a little bit of like a visual understanding how it looks.
We'd love to do that. I mean, the big answer to your question is you don't mash it all together into one document. You do is you create a timeline, and you show these are the activities that occurred on the timeline. And you use your traditional metadata that you're talking about, like modified, access, created, and you stick those in the timeline too. So you can see here's a document being created, copied, moved, accessed, and you can walk through the person's day and see when they were doing things.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. All right. Thank you very much, Charlie. It's been a pleasure, and we'll probably get together for more videos like this.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you, Nikolai.
All right. Have a good day. All right, so there you go. Hope you learned something. I certainly did. Like I said, I did not know answers to any of these questions. These are my personal questions that I wanted to ask Charlie, which I did, and those are the answers he gave me. I'm actually happy with the answers. I think it all makes sense. Again, I just don't have any practical experience using this type of data in my day-to-day. So maybe we'll do a sort of a video of how ESI Analyst works and get a little bit more understanding into user-generated data. All right, see you guys on the next video.